Okay, welcome to another edition of the Edlow Podcast. Subscribe. This will be a fun one. Maybe it'll be triggering for some people. Maybe it won't. Maybe this is something you need to hear. Maybe it's something you didn't realize you needed to hear. But this is one I'm really excited about. I'm here with Kate Anthony. Kate Anthony is the author of The D Word, Making the Ultimate Decision About Your Marriage. Right out the gate. So is the D word divorce or decision?
I don't know. You tell me, Josh.
Oh, there you go. Up to up to the
It's
reader.
a
Okay.
play. It's a play on the words.
Yeah, interesting. So you also host a critically acclaimed and New York Times recommended podcast, the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. And you're the creator of the online coaching program, Should I Stay or Should I Go, which helps women make the most difficult decisions of their lives using coaching tools, relationship education, geeky neuroscience, community support, and deep self-work. And you are a certified domestic violence advocate, a co-parenting specialist, and a high conflict divorce coach. That is a lot of dealing with divorce. So tell me, Kate, what was it that got you down this road?
Well, it started with my own divorce. And really it was because I was in a very, I say volatile, but really it was a very emotionally abusive marriage. And we ended up somehow being able to have a really amicable split. And it's the total luck of the draw. Like, this is not something I don't, of all the things that you can, make your divorce go a certain way or whatever. This is something that I think really is luck of the draw. And sometimes you don't know. Sometimes you can be divorcing somebody. I have a friend who's getting divorced right now from like the guy that we thought was like the nicest guy in the world, who is making it absolutely awful.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard a lot of people say you don't really know somebody until you get to go through a divorce.
Nope. I say the same thing. Or like, until you break up with them, right? Like, right, whether it's divorce or not. So, I mean, it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. It just, you learn so much about people in that moment. So we ended up having a really good amicable split, and I was very lucky. But so people would come to me and ask me, how did you guys do this? This is crazy. You got, and like, we were the couple that nobody wanted to be around. We were the couple that people were like, really, it was uncomfortable. It was embarrassing. And so when we split up, people were like, ooh, this is going to be gnarly. And it wasn't. And so then they were like, well, how did you guys, if you guys did this, like, how did that happen? And, but then I went to school. I got certified as a coach, as a relationship systems coach. And I've like so many certifications. It's kind of silly, but, but I value, professional, personal development. So, it won't stop. So I just think that, so over time, and as I worked with more and more women over the last 10, 12 years, the domestic violence stuff was something that I didn't actually like go into this thinking I was going to do. Even though I am a victim of domestic abuse. Emotional abuse is a form of domestic violence, and a lot of people don't really understand that, but I learned that the hard way. And, because it's all about power and control. It's all about, taking away your sense of self, taking away your power over whatever it is, right? Usually, very specifically, your sense of self.
That's actually, I don't mean to break you. Let me throw in a little bit of lawyerly stuff in that.
Oh, yeah.
Not that I'm a divorce attorney, but I've done some research.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
And the thing that's interesting about that is exactly what, like, I think people think, like, I'm thinking of restraining orders, right? So a lot of people think that in order to get her, including judges, by the way, right? Like even old school judges think, unless it's a physical abuse, that you can't get one. That's not true. In fact, there's case law here in California. I know you're in California,
Yeah.
so I don't know if you know much about this, but the case law in California says, I found this really surprising. If you get unwanted text messages or calls more than 3 in a day, that would be considered harassment for purposes of restraining order. I mean, that little, right? And I've heard
really
stories.
Good to know. Yeah.
It's you hear stories of people who are getting 50, 60, 70 text messages. They're calling from Google phones. They're calling from, you know what I mean? Like all these different things, and they're threatening things and doing all this stuff. And you think, well, they're not hitting them or threatening to kill them or something like that. So no, it doesn't have to be that much.
It does not. And the idea, like, well, you didn't hit me. I mean, I have so many women who say to me like, well, he doesn't hit me. So, and then I hear what he is doing. And I'm like, that's, I know women who have been physically assaulted by their spouses who will say, the bruises heal. I can get past the physical assault. The emotion, the consistent emotional and psychological torture, that's the harder part. That's harder to heal from. And that's worse. So, and I also know women who are being emotionally abused, and like, if he would just hit me, then I would leave. Like that would be that's the line, right? Or then I feel justified in leaving. And so, I think this education is so important for people to understand, men and women, because, men are victims of this, not as much as women, but absolutely men are can be victims too, especially from the emotional and psychological.
And the thing that's hard about that, the thing that's really hard about that too, it's a really hard dichotomy right now, especially in what I would call, I don't like the phrase necessarily, but I would call like the Me Too era, is that like, because of the Me Too era, you almost want to always believe the women, but in the rare cases where it's not the man, I mean, we kind of saw, I think that was probably more of like both sides were having a problem, but like the Johnny Depp, I can't remember her name,
Amber Heard
situation.
I don't think both sides were the problem, but
okay. Well, where do you think the problem was there?
With him.
Oh, okay.
You look at power and control, who had the power, who had the control, who had the money, who had the, he threatened to destroy her career. Victims don't behave well. They just don't. I behaved in my marriage in ways that I've never behaved before or since. When you're being abused and you're being psychologically manipulated and you have somebody throwing, bottles at your face or whatever, like, and threatening you on a daily basis, you don't behave well. And, I think it's, so there's a lot that I have to say about that. And it's very controversial. And I actually had a chapter about it in my book, and my publisher was like, we don't exactly know how litigious Johnny Depp is. And I was like, well, actually we do, because he dragged Amber Heard, who just wanted it to be over. She just wanted this to be over. She just wanted to go on her way. And he kept bringing her back to court because he could. Right. When you see her coming into court and she's like, I just want to get this done. And he's all waving to the crowds like he was eating it up. He loved it.
Well, so let me ask you about this, because this is the thing that I think is really worried. And this is kind of me pivoting away from Johnny Depp necessarily.
Yeah. No, it's a landmine.
But like, so for example, right?
Yeah.
Like I shared with you, I'm Mormon. And there's a lot of people who, not a lot, but I mean, the Mormons more and more are getting divorced for a lot of various reasons. But it does seem to tend to be that the man has done typically something, at least in this population.
Yeah.
More often than not, you could see the man did something that kind of, spearheaded the reasons, and they're pretty good, clear reasons,
Pretty egregious, right?
Yeah. It's never they just grew apart situation,
Right.
And
because I think in the Mormon church, growing apart would not be seen as a good enough reason, right?
Yeah.
That, like,
100%.
let's have a spiritual conversation about this or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And we're going to get into some questions about that, because I think that's something my listener base would be really interested in, particularly what you talk about, growth and boundaries. But one of the things that I find so interesting is that if you are so because the perception and the narrative is that women are, and it's true that women are most often abused. When the man is abused, there's so many things that are so different, right? Like there's a shame component for a man that's way different. And because it's not physical, sometimes it is, but because it's not physical, the man is then, am I really like, they can't even imagine that they've been abused.
That's
you see what I'm saying?
Right. I do.
So it's really interesting, that dichotomy, because we're in a place where I think rightly the paradigm has shifted towards believing women who have been abused versus where it wasn't always like that. But the unintended consequences is then if the man is being abused, almost has a harder time coming to grips with that himself, and society kind of accepting it. Not saying that's not a necessary consequence, that it shouldn't be that way. Just saying that does kind of happen.
No, it's really true. And look, I think that, there are a lot of men who are physically abused. And the response is like, you've got 100 pounds on her. Like, what are you talking about? And, you can fight back. But you're not going to fight back because you are that much bigger. And as soon as you do fight back, then you are the aggressor, just by the sheer volume of your size, right? Like that's, that's it.
Well, and also you have to think about this. Police also, just by nature of their job, have a narrative in mind, and they're going to follow that. So if a woman's coming through with a black eye and you've got a little mark on your arm, you know what I mean? Like, who are they going to believe? So that's really hard.
That's
right. And also we're taught we're not supposed to do that.
Well, right. And you're not. And you're not, by the way, right? Like you're not. Right. No one is supposed to, if you're being physically assaulted, of course your response is to fight back. But I would say that most men who are victims, their response is just defense, right? Like just defense, because they don't want to hurt their partner. They don't, right? Because they know that they can, and they don't want to, because they are not aggressors in that way.
Yeah. Well, and the thing also for a man, and I'm trying not to pull back too far on personal stuff, but I can tell you that in those circumstances, it's not about like the physical pain.
No.
You know what I mean?
No.
It's not about that at all. Like you kind of said earlier, the scars will, the physical scars will heal, the emotional scars won't.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's really right. Tough. And it's really hard. And it's, when the person that you most love is attacking you, whether it's emotionally, psychologically, or physically, it's devastating.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense. Right.
Let me ask you something. I want to kind of jump into something in your book that I found really interesting because of some of the stuff I've heard before. You mentioned, like, right out the gate, that you deserve to be happy in your marriage. And there's some people out there that I've heard. You start by defining happiness, and then you say that, that everybody deserves to be happy. But there are people out there who tend to talk about the origin of marriage and how happiness really wasn't the goal of marriage, and and also it's a feeling, so it's kind of fleeting. You really shouldn't be looking for happiness. What do you think about that?
Well, so first of all, I actually don't say that you deserve to be happy in your marriage. I say you deserve to be happy.
Right? Right. Sure.
You deserve to be happy. And really, because this book is written primarily for women, I really mean that to women, and especially mothers we are so conditioned to believe that we have to put our own needs last, especially mothers, right? Like, well, as long as your kids are happy and as long as your husband's happy, like, your needs don't really matter, but that should make you happy, right? And I just want to, like, bust that down, because I don't think that's right? Like, we've got this one life. This is it. Am I really living it for everybody else?
Right.
I don't want to.
It's funny what you just said actually struck a chord. And again, I know that you're speaking generally, but especially within Christian circles, especially in my circle, like what you're doing there, that is actually something that is taught to everyone. I mean, like, I remember I served a mission for my church for 2 years, and we had this little thing that we were given called, it said, I am third. And what it was supposed to mean was God is first, then you serve everyone else, then you. And I remember hearing the president of the church in the 90s talking about marriage and him saying, if every man put his wife's comfort as his first priority and every woman put her husband's first priority as his comfort, there'd be less divorce in the world. That works really, really well in theory. But what happens when one person stops doing that, right? Then one person, you go ahead.
But also that sort of presupposes that my spouse making me a priority is the thing that's going to make me happy, right?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Right? Like my happiness is derived from another. Then I have no power and control. And as you said, what happens if they take it away? Then I just I don't get to be happy because my husband decided not to love me anymore or put my happiness first. Like, no, I don't want to put my happiness in the hands of somebody else. I want it to be for me. It's funny because I actually, my one of our couples therapists when we were, before divorce, he said, Kate, in order of priority, like how do you rank, like, your son, your husband, yourself, and my mother was in the mix because that was a whole thing.
Right.
And
it's funny. It's real quick before you go on. It's so interesting how extended family really can get involved.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I was still so enmeshed with my mom that it was an issue. And my husband was right about that. But which is very different now. But and I said, well, obviously my son is first,
Sure.
Then I think I may have put my mom next, and then my husband, and then me. And my therapist was like, wow, we have this completely upside down. And he said, you have to be first. You have to be first. And then he said, and then your husband, because when you create that solid foundation in the home of your own happiness and then your marriage, then your son flourishes from there.
So what you're saying there, I bet there's a lot of people listening, right, who says, when you say you have to be first, especially within the church, where church circles are going, that sounds very selfish. So maybe you can tell us how that wouldn't be considered selfish. Like let people feel that. What does that mean, right?
Well, I mean, look, we, very basics. We come in alone, we go out alone. This is, people will come into your life, they'll go out of your life. Your children grow up, they fly the nest. A lot of women, especially stay-at-home moms, have real mental health crises when their kids end up going, flying the coop as they should, right? And then who am I? Yeah. I think we should all be in charge of our own happiness. And look, and I think different things make us happy. But by the way, community is we are not solo creatures. I'm not saying that, every man for himself and we should all just live on our own separate islands and have no intimacy, right? Because humans, my God, we are communal creatures. We need connection. We need love. But how can I give myself to you honestly and authentically if I don't even know who I am?
Sure.
How can I share with you? And so I think the foundation of a happy marriage and union has got to be that I know who I am and that listen, there is a difference between there's independence, there's codependence, and then there's interdependence. And we have to strive for interdependence. But
what is the difference? What is the difference between codependence and interdependence?
So codependency is I'm okay, you're okay, which is sort of what we were just talking about, right?
Right.
If you're okay, I'm okay. That's right. So my happiness is purely dependent upon, like, are you happy? Did we make the right dinner? Is that, what do you want for dinner, honey? I don't know. What do you want? Right. Because I can't think for myself. I'm putting all of it onto the other person. Which puts a lot of pressure on somebody in a marriage or in a relationship. Right.
Yeah.
And so, and then independence is, I don't need anybody. Right. But interdependence is, I am so good on my own. I'm really good on my own. I am a fully formed human who chooses to share this life with this other person, which requires me to open myself up in vulnerability, to connect, to blend in certain ways, but also then separate and do my own thing and, have my own friends and have my own life. But I'm still living all of that in partnership with you.
Interesting. So, one of the things I found really interesting when you read your book, you mentioned the three main components that bring up happiness, which do not sound selfish at all. Just breaking them down: positive emotional experiences, deep sense of meaning and purpose, and self-knowledge. When you think about, those are the main components that make you happy. And I agree with that, by the way.
Yeah.
Is that, you say in your book, and I really identified when I was reading it, I was like, this is dead on. You talk about a lot of people place happiness on material things, kind of, that type of thing. Sure. And it's funny because a little bit about me. I grew up in a home. My dad is a recovered drug addict. He went to rehab finally when I was 17, and he's been clean ever since. So he's a great guy now.
Same.
Him and my okay. So we're very familiar. My parents actually stayed together through all of that, and they're still together to this day, right? And it's an interesting, rocky story, but you know,
like good. I mean, maybe good for that, right? But so even me, right? Like even me, like sort of the divorce coach is like totally has that like internalized, like, oh, that's good, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not. Like maybe it wasn't good for your mom when your dad was a drug addict, right?
Well, it's really funny, and if they listen to this, they're going to get really annoyed by me saying this. But the thing is they never really did any sort of couples therapy or anything like that. And I really did think that had they done it back, I think they did a little bit, but definitely not enough. Because the ensuing years after that were rough. I mean, when you have a drug addict, them coming out of that and kind of learning who they are, that's a rough go.
It
right? And if you can imagine me at 17 dealing with somebody who had basically had the maturity as my father of the same ilk, it was rough, right?
Right, exactly. And he's your dad who you're looking to for the image of what is manhood, what is it to be a man, right?
But I gotta hand it to him though. I gotta say, like, my dad now we have a great relationship, and he's a great guy. And like, I do look to him for advice on things, and and my mom too. She's very, very connected, with my kids. I mean, they love her to death. Grandma's the best, and all of those things. But the reason I bring that up is because when I grew up, there were two things that my parents always fought about: drugs and money, right? And so I kind of grew up thinking, well, don't do drugs, make all the money, you're going to be fine. You know what I mean? And so, like never did drugs, done very well financially. And then I started noticing, I noticed something very interesting was that I got all the things that I wanted, like a checklist of all the things I wanted. And then at the end of the checklist, I was like, I'm not feeling it. Right. And so I'm like, well, then obviously I need the big fancy car. And then I did that. And then, you know what I mean? And then soon after that,
bigger car. Right. Obviously.
Obviously I need a pinball machine. Right. Like that stuff like that. And I have one, and it's amazing. But like,
did that work? Did that do it?
What's funny about I hate to admit this.
It did.
Well, it did, but for like 30 seconds. I gotta say though, the beautiful thing about it is that my favorite thing about kids is when you have kids, you use them as excuses to do all the silly things you want to do. right?
That's such a dad thing. That's such a dad thing. I'm so like not that. Yeah, that's such a dad thing. Like, oh, cool, we get to play.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I get to go to Chuck E. Cheese again and not look like a weirdo. This is great. You know what I mean? And so, so I bought that pinball machine, and in my head I was like, well, my kids will love this. They never touch it. They never touch it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but it wasn't until I started noticing what I really enjoy is things like every Sunday morning I wake up and I do breakfast with my kids.
Yeah, I love that.
Like I do one-on-one trips with each of the kids. This year for Christmas, they all got a one-on-one trip with me, right? Wherever, like doing something special. That is where I get fulfilled, not the fancy car, right? And so, but the point I mean that is that when you look at that and you say, well, it's very important for you to have positive emotional experiences, have a sense of meaning and self-knowledge. That doesn't sound so selfish.
No, right?
Right. So but here's the thing, something I wanted to ask you about it, and maybe you can help people work through this, because I've seen marriages like this where somebody is noticing that they're lacking in this area. So they start doing something, and this might be a codependence thing. And so somebody then will go and start doing things to find these positive emotional experiences, deeper meaning. And you mentioned in your book, you say in healthy marriages, the other partner is just happy for you to go and do these things.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you've seen that's not always the case.
No.
How, if you're in that kind of marriage, when you have somebody, what would you say to somebody who's dealing with that, where they're trying to have these positive emotional experiences on their own, and the other person has a difficult has a problem with it? How do you navigate that?
Well, I would say that I would want to know what the problem is, right? And 9 times out of 10, I would say they're threatened in some way, and they're scared of something.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. There's got to be some insecurity there. They must be feeling like this thing is going to take you away from them. And listen, we all have reactions to these sorts of things. We all have these feelings, right? And so, okay, like maybe we talk about it and I go, oh, I'm totally threatened by that. I'm actually threatened by that. And I don't really want to be threatened by that. That's kind of weird. And I'm so sorry. Let me figure out what that is. And then I'm going to take that to my therapist and I'm going to figure out what that is. Right.
Yeah.
That's great. It's not that you're not going to have conflict. It's that we're looking at like, oh, I'm looking at myself. Right. And so if I have positive self-regard, if I have self-esteem, if I've done the work on myself and put myself first in that way, then I'm able to self-reflect. But if my happiness is solely derived from you and I don't have anything to reflect on, I'm not going to be able to take personal responsibility for anything in the relationship. And so if I say to my partner, like, what's your issue with this? And they're just adamant that I not do it, that it's stupid, that it's just taking time away from me, whatever it is, right? And there's no self-reflection, that's the problem.
Do you think it would be okay? Because here's another question. Someone might listen to this and look at that and say, well, this just means I should be able to do whatever I want with no restriction.
No.
Do you think it is okay to have, like, for a partner to say, it's a little much. It's a little too much. Is that okay?
Yes, because that's the interdependence, right? Like, we're in a relationship. Like, if we're in a relationship, we're in a container together, right? And so everything I do affects you.
Right.
Everything you do affects me, right? How we deal with that is what matters, right?
Yeah.
So if you say, you know what? It kind of bums me out. Like, it feels like you've been going out a lot lately, and I want you to have fun and I want you to have time with your friends. And like, I don't want to stand in the way of that, but also I'm feeling a little lonely and I'm feeling a little disconnected. And I'm wondering if we can find balance in this together.
So in your work, let me ask you, because that sounds fine. Yet in practice, that sounds really hard for some people. to say that. So like, how do you get somebody to get away from like the fear of speaking up? Like I know, I'm sure there's a lot of women out there with a lot of husbands who are out golfing, out doing things they don't like, having fun, and they don't, you mentioned rocking the boat, being afraid to rock the boat, right? Yeah. So like, how do you coach somebody into being able to speak up without fear of causing a problem?
Well, you are going to rock the boat. Like if the boat needs to be rocked, like, let's rock it for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's really like, how does the other person respond? But I mean, I hear you. I have friends, close friends, who will talk to me, complain bitterly about their spouse and, him, the way that he basically operates like he's independent in their home, and they have 2 kids, right? And I say, honey, have you talked to him about this? Like, have you sat down and said, like, this isn't working for me?
You mean independent, like he's walking around the house but not really doing much to help the kids? Is that what you mean?
Oh, totally.
Okay.
And also, like, he's sick and he'll lie in the living room and take up the whole living room so no one else can go in there, right? Or like he just gets up and makes himself a sandwich and like not the kids, or doesn't ask her if she, like, literally just functions like a, and I said, have you talked to him? Like, have you sat down and said, and she burst into tears and she's like, I can't do that. That's too hard.
So, okay, maybe I'm just different. I just don't get that. You see what I'm saying? Like, I don't understand that.
I don't either. Listen, I mean, either way, I don't get it. Like, I don't get him just like, acting like he doesn't have a family, and her just being like, it's too hard for me to express my feelings to my husband.
Well, and I maybe that's true too, but I mean the husband part where they don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand. I think I could say that as a father and also someone who works and does all these other things, sometimes when you got something in your head, you get a little bit of tunnel vision and you're not thinking. But I mean, to just be like, I've heard of this from friends of mine where they've got like these husbands who literally have do nothing for their kids. And and this might be a little bit of a rant for me.
Go for it.
Give me a second.
I'm here for it.
So the thing that I find really interesting, so I do a lot with my kids, right? But the thing is I don't think I'm doing anything that is extraordinary. I think I'm just like, hey, you want to go to dinner? Let's go out to dinner, right? One-on-one. Right.
And then you wear, and all the women are like, oh, look at him. He's such a good
dad. That's what I'm saying, is that like, I don't know how many people who are like, I have season tickets to the Kings, and I did it. This is another one of those I'm blaming my kids things. I love basketball, but I was like, this is a good excuse for me to go one-on-one with one of my kids, get him to a game, go out to dinner, watch a fun game. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I'm always doing that stuff, and I'm just hearing, you're such a good dad. I just love how and I sit there and I go, what? Okay, guys, you are setting the bar super low.
So low.
You know what I mean? And it's just like, it's shocking to me when I'm hearing some women that I know who are like, my husband didn't do this or my husband doesn't do that. And I'm just going like, I don't get it. So it's like, but the thing I guess I don't understand about that is, how do you think that is like, when that happens? Do you think that is the guy just being oblivious? Or do you think that's like, we hear a lot about the term narcissism. We hear a lot about, which we're both buddies with Tony Overbay, who's like the narcissist king. Right. Not that he's a narcissist, but I mean, like, he knows this stuff.
He does.
And he'd say everybody has a little bit of narcissism.
Yeah.
It's emotional immaturity.
Yeah.
Do you think this is an emotional immaturity, being oblivious, actually narcissism, or maybe that just varies?
I think it's social. A lot of it is social conditioning. We did this thing, right? It's like we went from the 50s where, men worked, women stayed home, took care of the kids in the house, right? And that was a full-time job. By the way, that's like a 24/7 job. That's not even a 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
And then the 40-hour work week was predicated on men having someone at home to take care of everything else.
Right.
And then women entered the workforce, but men didn't shift into picking up the domestic labor in the equal way, right? So it's like you've got two working parents and they both go to work, 9 to 5, let's say, and then they come home and he goes to the bathroom for an hour, or he goes downstairs and plays video games, and she walks in the door and hits the ground running, making dinner, getting lunches ready for tomorrow. But and so I think there's a little bit of a social conditioning and societal expectations of what, of gender roles that are really outdated. Right. And it's a holdover, right? Because look, this is, maybe our parents were like that. Maybe our moms didn't work. Yeah. My mom was full-time single mom. She worked her butt off. But this is sort of a holdover. And I do see a real shift. I don't know if you see it with your kids, but I'm seeing it with millennials and with my son's generation, Gen Z. They're just not buying into all this stuff. And I have huge hope for them.
It's so interesting. There's a couple things that I would say about that I was thinking as you were talking about that. I find that really fascinating. You're right in that, here we have this situation over the course of the last 50, 60 years where women have entered the workforce and started to become more independent in that way, but the rest of society hasn't quite caught up with it yet. You know what I mean? We're trying to figure out how to adjust, and men are trying to figure out how to adjust to this. I can tell you, just in the workplace, I mean, men, you see in the legal profession, there's so much employment law out there because men are acting ways that are not kosher anymore. And women, especially in the law, we have a lot of women who, I think in my class in law school, at least 50% of the people graduating with me were women, but it's not 50% of the women. I'm a partner at my firm. I can tell you there's not 50% of the people my age that are women partners. Do you see what I'm saying?
They had they had to opt out, right? Yeah. They had to opt out of the workforce, or they chose to opt out of the workforce, whether they wanted to or not. It just was like, well, somebody's got to stay home. And by the way, you make 78 cents on the dollar that I make, so I guess it's you.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's interesting about that, though, then on top of that, the next generation, I have to tell you, as somebody who grew up in the 90s and is trying to keep up with, I have a daughter who's big into theater, right? Mm-hmm. And I couldn't tell you how many pronouns I've had to learn and how many different gender binary stuff. And it's I'm open to it, right? But it's definitely something that she's big into knowing this stuff.
That's
and
right.
I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, wait. So this person who just came over to the house, so that's not a boy or a girl. Tell me more about so when they come over, what
Batman? I don't get it.
Yeah, tell me what I'm supposed to call them. Right? And she teaches me, and she's 12. So we have from the last generation all this kind of somewhat archaic idea of what women are supposed to do, and then we got this younger definition. Just don't even believe in the genders.
They're trying to catch up with this women's lib stuff, and what do you mean I can't slap her on the fanny and call her sweetheart?
Yeah. Meanwhile, the generation underneath us, they don't even buy gender. You know what I mean? And so so I'm sitting here in the middle going so where am I supposed to land?
Totally. Well, and I think, we have actually, I don't know what generation you consider. I'm clearly Gen X. Okay. And
So wait, what year? I don't want to age you, but what year did you graduate high school?
A long time ago, in the 80s, 89.
Oh, okay. You're a little. So yeah, I was in the 90s, so we're not that far off.
Yeah. Okay. 90 what? In the 90s, meaning?
Well, 99.
Wow. Okay, Josh. Talking to you. Yeah.
But
So I think well, anyway, it doesn't matter. So, but like Gen X is like, I mean, we did affect this change.
Yeah.
Like we affected this change. Our parents, like, this whole like Gen X was like out there, being raised by wolves and drinking out of the garden hose. Like that's real.
Yeah.
Being a latchkey kid in New York City.
Oh, wow.
I grew up in Manhattan. I grew up in New York City and I was a latchkey kid. Let me tell you, like that is real. And so we really did affect a lot of this change, partly because we had a lot of trauma that we had to deal with. We had a lot of, benign neglect, a lot of little t trauma that we had to deal with.
Yeah. And that's funny. I feel a little bit the same way in that when I see what my kids have to deal with the advent of phones and the internet and things like that. I don't know how many times I've told my kids, I'm like, guys, if there was YouTube when I was around, I would have been like, we all would have been canceled. You know what I mean? Like just the things that we did. Oh, I know, because the thing is back in the night, it just was a different world.
If there was photographic evidence and Instagram of like all the stuff that we did, forget it.
Oh man. Well, yeah, no kidding. It's such a different world, and we're dealing with all of this, and we've got this. So we've got this situation of people trying to figure out happiness, and I think this is something that's also really hard in within the confines of the traditional Mormon church as well. Not that this is not a Mormon podcast, but it's something that keeps coming to me, and that is that we still encourage traditional gender roles.
Yeah,
there's so many single income families where the mom stays home, the dad is out working, and doing those things. But in the same, so I can understand a situation where a woman who is a stay-at-home mom still wants to be a part of this feminist movement, right? But as a stay-at-home mom, and you have a husband, I can see this being an even bigger issue between them, because you have a husband who she's coming home and saying, hey, I'd like some help around the house. I'd like you to not pretend like our kids don't exist and just living in your own life, right? But then he's sitting there and going, well, wait a minute, I work all the time and you're here all the time. I don't understand why I need to help with the dishes when, you know what I mean? What would you say is a good way to work this out? Right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you do that?
I would explain that, first of all, you go to work from, let's say, 9 to 5, right?
Uh-huh.
I wake up at 6. Depending on how many kids they have, right? How old they are, the age ranges. Mm-hmm. I'm getting the baby ready. Then I'm making breakfast all day long. I'm home with the baby. And then I pick up the kids. I take this one to this, soccer, to this, to that, to the other thing. Then I come home and I have to make dinner, and then I have to clean up dinner. And then I'm doing homework, and then I'm doing this. And it goes all the way to bedtime. Yeah. How is that equal?
Right. Well, it's interesting that you bring this up, because I think that in these situations, like I have a few friends that are in this spot, right? Mm-hmm. And it really comes down to, especially like in these circles where people get married very young. I mean, the women are getting married at times where they probably live at home their whole lives, and then they get married and they move in with their husband. That's the first time. Maybe they went to college for a little while. Mm-hmm. So you have this situation where the man doesn't understand what the woman is doing all day. Like, he doesn't get it because he's not there, right? But at the same time, the woman also, if they don't have a corporate job or are not working, they don't understand some of the intensities of living within the corporate world. Yeah. Like, it's not like the husband in most of these situations is just going to the water cooler and hanging out all day.
Sure.
So there's a big clash there. And I'm just wondering, when you have those situations, what is the best way to be able to effectively communicate these kind of like different worlds that they're living in?
I mean, I think it's a great question. And I think it really comes down to empathy, right? Mm-hmm. Are you listening empathically? Like when your wife comes to you and says, I am overwhelmed and overworked, and we have to figure out a better division of labor here, because as far as I'm concerned, if one person in the relationship is unhappy, then the relationship doesn't work. If the dynamic and the setup and the whatever, the agreements don't work for one person, the relationship doesn't work. And so, believe me, hear your partner the first time. When your partner says to you, I am exhausted. I haven't had a shower in 3 days because I literally don't have time. I'm working around I know that your job. The thing is, I think there's this competition. When I come to you and I say I'm exhausted, and I'm losing my mind, and there's too much for me to handle, and there's too much on my plate, and I can't do it all by myself, and I need more from you. If your response is, yeah, well, I work hard, you have no idea what I do all day, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, okay, this is not a competition.
Yeah.
If you love me, you need to hear me.
Yeah. And I don't, that's another thing I don't, and maybe this is just me kind of growing up and kind of having to spend time with my, with these kids and having to do that stuff. But like, I don't understand the competition element to that. It just because you're stressed doesn't mean the other person is stressed. It's just a different kind of stress, and I don't think I don't think men understand how much it would mean for them to say, hey, you know what? I know you're stressed. Why don't you take a shower and maybe call a girlfriend, and I got it for 4 hours. Just go do something. You know what I mean?
Do you know how many, first of all, you will 100% have sex tonight? 100, listen, do you know seriously, there was a scientific study from like some big scientific, I can't even remember who it was now, some American scientific, blah, 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 whatever, big study, that men who do more domestic labor have more sex. Men want, this is a huge issue in marriages, right? The inequality of libidos. Listen, when we're exhausted, the last thing we want is sex.
No, I get it.
If you want to get laid, do some extra, let her go out with her friends and give her some, she will feel like she will drop dead with gratitude.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because it's funny too, because I used to not understand the love language thing. But yeah, like some people, their love language is acts of service, and for a mother who stays home, an act of service is taking out the trash and there's a reason why comedians joke about this stuff, right? Like female comedians joke about, you want sex from me, take out the trash. That's because it's telling you something. Yeah, we're telling you something.
Literally true.
Yeah. So now real quick to shift, there's another thing that I found really fascinating in your book that for some reason I never heard of it defined like this before, but you call it weaponized incompetence.
Yeah.
And tell me what you mean by that.
Oh, I mean, can I read you an exchange? I can give you if I have it, I might be able to give you an actual, yes. Okay. This is an actual exchange that a client of mine had. I'm totally anonymous here. I really hope nobody's watching. Dude, she wants more chocolate milk in that green cup. What do I do? I need a nap, he says. And she says, why are you asking me? You can parent for a little bit. If you want her to have some, then pour some in there. From where do we have chocolate milk? He says. She says, in the fridge? In the box from Costco? And he says, so you take it out of the box and you put it in the bottle? And she says, yes. Open a milk and pour it in.
I laugh because I felt this.
This is weaponized incompetence. This is what do you mean? What do you mean? You open the milk and you put it in the sippy cup? And so she is now having to spend her time. They both work from home. This was her work time, his parenting time. So now her work time is spent educating him on how to give the child chocolate milk instead of actually working. That is weaponized incompetence. It's pretending you don't know how to do something, pretty simple.
And it becomes more frustrating when you've done the exercise multiple times and they still don't get it. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing is that
I call BS. You're not that dumb.
Right. And that's the thing is that like, yeah, it's and I bet that guy is very competent in everything else he does. You know what I mean? Like that's just
Yes.
it's this one area where you have to actually perform something you don't want to do that you are suddenly incapable of.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
feel
weaponized
it.
incompetence right there.
So tell me then, because I gotta say, when I listen to that exchange, right, I can imagine
Your
though
head explode.
the way she's responding. Well, I understand why she wants to explode, but the way that she's responding, how I guess what I'm saying is how do you coach somebody in that moment, understanding that it pisses them off, understanding that they want to explode? How do you coach somebody to handle that if
Yeah.
they're wanting to stick through it?
Well, I would say my response would be, you're a really smart, capable man. I'm sure you'll figure it out. I'm working right now.
Mhm.
You know, I would not solve the problem for him. I
Mhm.
would say you're a really competent human being. I'm sure you'll figure it out.
Yeah, and the thing is, let me ask you, unless you're dealing with somebody who has a narcissism or some sort of mental health issue that is causing something different.
Yeah.
That just sounds to me like setting a boundary, right?
It
Okay,
is.
during my work time, I am not going to be parenting. You can handle it.
That's right.
You can figure it out.
And it's easy to set a boundary. The harder part is following through, right?
Definitely.
So you set the boundary and say, listen, this is going to be my work time. And so I need you to be on duty for parenting. And so then when he texts me when I'm working, I don't respond.
Yeah.
Right?
So that parlays me into something else, because anyone who knows me and is listening to this is probably screaming at me because they know I am the worst at following through on boundaries.
Yeah,
I'll tell you what. Yeah. So how do you develop the I don't know what you would say. What's the word I'm looking for? How do you develop the tolerance for being able to do that? Because I'm the type of guy, and I know it comes from my parents. I was grounded. I think if I accumulated all the weeks I actually was grounded, I'd probably still be grounded. But I never actually spent anywhere near. I got off for good behavior pretty quick. Most of the time.
Yeah, right.
And I think that carries through, like with my kids and in my other relationships, like when I'm dealing with them, it's really hard for me when I try to set a boundary, to not, because a boundary the way you don't hold is really not a boundary. Right.
That's right.
How do you develop the tolerance for these boundaries?
Well, it's practice. It's a lot of practice. And it's, this is a codependency issue, right? It's like, but I set a boundary and then he didn't do it. And it's like, well, then you didn't set a boundary.
Right.
Right. Because listen, it's people's natural inclination to push against boundaries. Right. We know this from parenting. As soon as we say like, no, you can't have a cookie, they're going to be like sneaking their hand up. I mean it. No. Right. And so, and I'm the same way as you as a parent. Like my son probably got off of every punishment he ever had with me because, first of all, he could talk me out of it.
Yeah.
Or he's like, but now I'm not doing it anymore. So
is he going to law school or?
Like when he was 2, his swim teacher was like, I hope you start saving for law school now.
Yeah.
Or he's not. Now he's a musician. So.
Oh, my son too.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. So I think so it is a matter of it is building tolerance. It is learning to sit in that uncomfortable space when people are pushing back. When people push back, they're looking for the boundary. They're looking to see if you actually mean it. And you learn who people are very quickly by how they respond to the boundaries that you set. And so if you set a boundary with someone who respects you and loves you and cares about you, and is not a narcissist and is somebody who actually wants you to be happy, they'll say, oh shit, I'm so sorry. I did not want to make you feel uncomfortable in that way. You're like, absolutely. Of course.
So, sorry, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Like somebody who is like pushing up against you, right? Your job is it's so hard. It's so hard, right? But I sort of talk about it like we're all pieces of this big puzzle, right? And as soon as we start to shift the shape of our puzzle piece, all the pieces around us have to either conform or they pop out. And there is this period of stress, and that's like before one or the other happens, right? And they're like, we're pushing up against each other. And as long as I am steadfast in my resolve, the other person eventually, they're either going to pop out of my life or they're going to conform and respect my boundaries. No one will respect your boundaries if you don't respect them.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this is something I wanted, like I said, we could talk forever about this stuff, but you got somebody who's at the end. They're at the end of their rope. Sure. They've been trying for years or whatever. I find that most of the people I talk to when they're at the verge of deciding to get divorced, this is something that is not new. It's been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
So when they're trying to make this decision, what do you think it is that the women, I know you're geared towards women, I would say anybody, but specifically women, what do they need to look at to decide whether they're actually ready to make that leap?
Well, it's really the self-work, right? It is really, really the self-work. And I think, there are certain questions that we can ask, like, does the other person's behavior, like, is this modeling somebody? Does this look like love? Or does this look like power and control? Does this, is it aligned with my values? And it depends, of course, like if we're, being victimized or if we're, just like unhappy. But it really is the self-work. And this is why, coming back to the beginning of our conversation, why this really has to be about us. And it has to be about, like, who am I? Because if I don't know who I am, then who's choosing? Who's assessing? Right? And if I'm unhappy and I haven't done any self-work, I'm going to blame it on you. But then, by the way, the divorce rate for second and third marriages is a lot higher. It doesn't go down, right? The divorce rate for second marriages is about 68%. For third marriages, it's around 74%. So we're just if we're just going to be like, you're the problem, I'm going to trade you out for somebody else, then I'm back in the same problem because it's still me. Right. So we have to do that work on ourselves because maybe it is me, maybe I haven't developed, maybe I haven't developed boundaries. Maybe I don't know how to be in relationship. Most of us don't know how to be in relationship. We have to learn.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing that I've been really fascinated by. Is that you say you have to look at yourself, but for some reason, I tend to be the type of person who maybe, and this is probably unhealthy too, but I tend to sometimes overlook at myself and feel bad about myself, right?
Yes.
So I don't understand it when I run into people who seem to just not be able to do the self-work, not be able to look at themselves, whether it's a shame issue or a trauma issue or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you tell that person to do the self-work?
Well, I wouldn't work with that person, but I mean, I do. I think, like, well, look, at the end of the day, that person's not going to be coming to me for help anyway, right? If they're not interested in looking at themselves, right? But at the end of the day, it's like, my gosh, like, this is one of my core values is personal development. Like, I'm always looking for ways and maybe to a fault, like you, like maybe I'm too like, I gotta fix it. And I think that's a codependent trait. I'm, raised by, an addict and this is how codependents are formed. And so I am I have a history of maybe taking too much responsibility and not actually laying the responsibility where it belongs, at the foot of the other person. I don't do that anymore. It took a lot of work to do that. But I think that at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't want to look at their own stuff, like, is that somebody that you want to be in relationship with? Like, does that align with your values?
Well, and that's what's hard, right? Is that, like, when you imagine the people who are like us, right? Who always looks at themselves with somebody who never looks at themselves, it creates a pretty unstable mental health situation.
That's right. That's right. Because if you're with someone who's always pointing the finger back at you, and you're the kind of person who's like, oh, okay, let me go take that away. And let me okay, you're right. No, I have responsibility. I have work to do. And this is what I did in my marriage. Like, oh, no. Oh, right. Okay. No. Yeah, it's me. Right. And I'll go and take another class, or I'll go and get another therapist, or I'll go and do another workshop, or whatever it is. And meanwhile, like, the other person isn't changing at all. And so, like, at a certain point, you kind of lift your head up out of your own stuff, and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah. And then the other person, they make a little bit of progress and want you to praise them. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and that's the thing that's really, like, you're not giving me credit, oh yeah, okay, I used to hurt you, but I don't hurt you as much as I used to. That's progress. You should be giving me a high five for hurting you a little bit less than I did before. It's really, it's a really frustrating situation. So, it doesn't sound to me like you are, even though people would look at the word and say the D word, say this is a book about divorce. It's really not.
It's not.
It's a book about figuring out whether you can make your marriage healthy, and if not, what do you do?
Yeah. And it's really, I have people who have read it have been like, this is a relationship book. Yeah. Right? This gives you the skills to be in relationship, and if it saved marriages, I'd be thrilled. Right? Because look, at the end of the day, if this helps you identify the areas of your marriage that are making you feel like it's imbalanced, or you're uncomfortable, you're not happy, and you can bring that to your partner, and your partner is receptive, right? If your partner says, oh my gosh, that's terrible, I don't want you to feel that way, even though the whole system and setup works for me, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work. Let's figure it out. And I actually have a friend who did that, a colleague who did bring this, she kind of identified through reading my book some areas of inequality, and was like, oh, that's why I feel stressed all the time. And she brought it to her husband, and he was like, oh my gosh, okay, what do we need to do?
It has to be what you do. And I've talked to Tony about this, off air. I've even had him on air, when he talks about narcissism, it's got to be really rewarding for you to see, if you deal with couples, to see two emotionally healthy people work through these things and actually come out with a better marriage. That's got to be really satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't see it very often, partly because I don't work with couples anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore. Now I really just work with women. And so, but when I hear those stories, I love it. I love it. It like thrills me to no end.
Do you find that now pretty much the people that you're seeing are people who either are getting divorced or want help with having the courage to ask for a divorce? Is that kind of what you see?
Yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, if you're Googling, should I stay or should I go? If you are, looking up this book, The D Word, you're probably not in a happy marriage, right? Yeah. Like, people who are in really healthy, happy marriages are not thinking about this every day.
Yeah. Okay, I know we're in overtime because you said you were giving an hour, but I have one question I really think I want to touch on, because I know a lot of people in this situation. You say, okay, well, if you're looking these things up, you're probably not in a happy marriage. Yeah. But what if you don't think you're in a bad marriage?
Yeah. Okay.
You're just kind of in like
it's okay.
I mean, this is fine, right? Like, I mean, am I in love? Maybe not, but you know what? Like, he hasn't done anything to make me want to divorce him. We're fine. I mean, it could be better. It could be worse. Like, what do you say? How do you coach those people?
I mean, I say, is that really what you want for your life? Like, do you really, I mean, really, this is the person you're spending the most time with, right? One very clarifying question that I often ask is this the person you want to walk off into the sunset with? When all is said and done, the kids are gone, and it's just the two of you, and you're rocking chairs on the front porch. Is that the person is this your best friend? Because all the other stuff that happens in marriage and like, stresses and blah, 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 is this your person? And if the answer is yeah, then wonderful. If the answer is, oh my God, no, then like, oh boy, that's clear. But, and the idea that like, I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, I don't want fine.
Yeah. Well, and that's I think what I mean is I remember the movie, what was it called? It was Steve Carell and Tina Fey, and they were together, and then they end up doing this thing. But there's this part where he looks at her and he says, I just feel like we're just kind of roommates.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people in that circumstance, right?
Well, sure. And they have kids, and like, I think this is part of parenting and parenthood, right? Is like, you get to a point where you're just like running from, point A to point B all day long, and you're, collapsing in bed at night, like Mike and Carol Brady reading your books, and like, sure. But on the other side of that, is this your person? And that's what, that movie, they were each other's person, and they found their way back to it, right? They were best friends. They started best friends, and life happened. And then, you're able to find your way back to, right? If I'm thinking correctly.
You're thinking of the right one.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing is I just remember having a conversation with a friend and him just being like, yeah, it's just the way marriage is, like it's fine. I mean, you're not always in this, and I'm like, you're not always, and I go, but are you ever in that love? And it's great because now talking to this guy, he's telling me how he's finally kind of realized, what he needed to do and really paying attention and really like spending a lot of time. And he's like, and it's flourishing. And he's like, I've been married for X amount of years. And I never felt comfortable giving of myself this way. And now I have, and it's been great. And he's like, it's flourishing. Whereas there were so many years where we would talk and he would just be like, yeah, it's not great, but it's not terrible. It's fine.
Yeah.
And he just kind of one day realized that's not what he wanted.
Right.
And now it's great. Right. And I worry about so many of my friends who are in that spot that never get to that place.
I mean, absolutely. And that's right. That's important. It's like you asked him that question. You want to have people in your life who are going to be like sort of needling you. Like, really, is that what you want? And he went, no, that's not what I want. And this is the person that I want to change it with.
Yeah.
And I think I know how to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Right. Well, listen, I've taken more of your time than you said you were going to give me. So I'm very much
perfectly happy.
Okay, good. But let me ask you, this obviously, I just have a couple of questions that I ask everybody that I want to just throw out at you.
Okay.
Okay. And then we'll wrap up. What would you say is your biggest success in life?
I think two things. My son, for sure. And having written this book, like, holy moly. Yeah. I'll tell you, I had 2020 COVID. So I had
you had COVID classic, huh?
I had OG COVID.
You had the real COVID, yeah.
I had like OG COVID, and it was bad. Yeah. And there was one night where I was going to bed and I thought I might not wake up. It was a very real possibility that I might not wake up. And I thought, and I was sort of thinking through my life, and it was a very weird sort of Zen, sort of almost peaceful experience, because I had no control. Like, there was nothing I could do one way or the other, right? And I was too exhausted anyway. And I thought, what do I have any regrets? And I thought, the only regret is that I hadn't yet written my book. And so as soon as I was better, that was like, okay, that's what we do. Yeah. So that's a huge accomplishment for me. And this journey of motherhood, crazy. Yeah. There's like a whole purpose that I made.
Parenthood is the hardest and most rewarding thing you'll ever do. Really, if you're doing it the right way.
That's right. That's right.
What would you say is your biggest failure, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, my biggest failure. That's a really hard question, Josh. You should have given it to me earlier so I could have thought about it. I think my biggest failure might be some of the relationships that I stayed in too long. Because I really wasn't. Oh my God, that's so funny. Did you?
Yeah, they're giving you the thumbs up. That was it. That was it, Kate.
I upgraded my to the next whatever. And this is the thing, So anyway, so I think some of the relationships that I stayed in for too long, one that I'm thinking of in particular, that's not even my marriage, that was so toxic and that did so much damage to me. And sort of, I think to some of my friendships and probably my kid, just by the very sort of, just by the fact that I was so consumed by it and really just in a bad emotional and mental place for a really long time.
But what did you learn from that?
Well, I learned what a trauma bond is. I learned how to heal from a trauma bond. I learned it was a few years before I quit drinking. I learned that alcohol is really, really bad when you're depressed.
Yeah.
It's really terrible things to you. I don't drink anymore anyway, but and I learned, I think I found myself through it. I think that I found some of my strength through it.
Wow.
Because I was so beaten down by it.
Well, the thing that's so interesting about failure is I have found in my life that you always fail up, right?
Yeah,
and so,
last
question. One day you are going to, glad it wasn't 2020, but one day you will pass away. And when you do, there'll be a funeral and a eulogy. What's the one thing you hope somebody says about you in your eulogy?
That I made a difference and that I shifted the conversation around not just marriage and relationships, but around womanhood and like what it is to be a woman in our culture.
Well, I can tell you, I think that you're doing great work, and I appreciate that. I loved when I read your 3 components of happiness. I couldn't have agreed more. And I think if more people just even that little nugget there of those 3 things and really focused on those things, I think that whether you decide to stay in a marriage or not, that there would be more happy relationships out there if people just followed those things. So where can people find you if they want to find you?
They can find me at kateanthony.com is my website, and everything is there. I am on Instagram at The Divorce Survival Guide. My podcast is The Divorce Survival Guide Podcast, and you can buy the D Word wherever books are sold.
Awesome. Well, for everybody who's listening, thanks for following up. Thanks for following us. We got a lot more exciting stuff coming on. Kate, thanks for giving me overtime. This one.
Thanks, Josh. It's so good to be here. I really appreciate this conversation.
Yeah.